Now, he did that because he wanted them to get an education. He wanted them to hone their craft. He knew that the journey is long, and he always had his eyes on the big picture. He knew that sports wasn't the end goal. It was the vehicle to having a better life. Now, these lessons hit home for L&D in so many ways. Organizations today spend millions of dollars on corporate training, onboarding, vendor libraries, snazzy tools and technologies. Now, every organization I speak with is laser focused on enabling learning in the flow of work. And that is important because that is how people learn. But we also need to pause and reflect and recognize that learning is not the end goal. It is the vehicle to enabling growth, and that is where L&D organizations need to refocus and reprioritize efforts. That is, in fact, the biggest theme we saw in our brand new research on corporate training at scale. That is our biggest research ever. We're releasing that research next week, so you are privy to early findings from the research before release, so I'm excited to share them with you. Let's get started. Now, we surveyed 1,000 organizations across the globe. We studied 94 practices across 9 broad areas that you can see on my screen. Now, the blue bars under each of those areas are the percentage of organizations who told us that they're doing really well in each of these areas. If you look more closely, that's an average of about 20%. So the good news is 1 out of 5 organizations knows exactly what matters in L&D. They are leveraging the right L&D strategies to differentiate outcomes and to win the war for talent. On the flip side, this also means that 80% of organizations in the world are still trying to figure this out. 4 out of 5 organizations are lagging in every area of L&D. And we recognize that of all domains in HR, L&D has leapfrogged years ahead on the journey to reinvention. If you think about it, L&D professionals are always doing new things. You are adapting to remote work models, setting up digital academies, buying new content, licensing new tools, building skills taxonomies, experimenting with AR, VR, the metaverse. L&D professionals are moving faster than ever. But the domain itself is moving so fast that they're struggling to keep up. So one of our goals with this research was to identify and unpack what is it that L&D needs to do to catch up. So when we studied these 94 practices, we also correlated them with talent, business, and innovation outcomes to identify which practices have the strongest impact on driving outcomes. These are the top 15 most impactful L&D practices today. Now, there's a lot of text on the screen. It's hard to read. I don't expect you to read it, and I will walk you through the key themes in just a second. But the reason why I wanted to put this visual up here is because these practices were the eureka moment for us. They crystallized for us where L&D is today and where exactly it needs to be. So the number 1 most impactful career growth practice today, or L&D practice today, is enabling extensive career growth options. And not just that, 5 out of 15 most impactful practices have to do with career growth. That must say something. So 5 out of 15 have to do with career growth. 4 have to do with leadership development, coaching, mentoring. 4 have to do with learning in the flow of work. And 2 have to do with leadership capabilities and L&D technologies. Now, the story that stood out to us loud and clear, which we also validated in conversations with CHROs and CLOs across the world, is that we're seeing a shift towards the outcomes of L&D. What matters most is what people want from learning. Today, 1/3 of the workforce is leaving their jobs every year. They're leaving in pursuit of better jobs, better careers, better lives. People want to grow. People want to grow in their careers. People want to grow as leaders. They want to build the skills and capabilities that will help them grow. Learning has the power and the responsibility to make them grow, but most organizations have not been able to make that connection. What is missing in L&D today is the connection between learning and growth. It is the focus on the end goal or the big picture that is missing. Organizations today need to orchestrate a shift from a culture of learning to a culture of growth because people want to grow. Learning can help them develop the capabilities that they need to grow, but if you don't create the opportunities to grow, they will find those opportunities elsewhere outside the organization. So growth is what matters the most, and facilitating growth in the flow of work is L&D's new mission. Easier said than done. What does growth in the flow of work look like, and how can organizations navigate that journey? So what I will share with you next is our maturity model, which is essentially a roadmap for organizations to assess where are you now, and how far you need to go, and how can you really get there. So here it is. When we studied over 1,000 organizations, we saw that each of those organizations fall in 4 different levels of maturity based on the effectiveness of the L&D practices they deploy. Level 1 are organizations with the least effective practices and outcomes, and level 4 are organizations with world-class L&D practices and superior talent, business, and innovation outcomes. Now, we saw very clear themes of L&D practices at organizations in each of these levels. So let me walk you through those very quickly so I don't keep you from lunch. Level 1 are organizations who we call at the level of programmatic training. So these organizations operate in a silo. They're focused on delivering mandatory, regulatory, compliance-focused, or programmatic training. So the focus is on delivering point-in-time training rather than enduring learning. Level 2 is when the shift starts to happen from training to learning. So organizations expand the scope of learning to broader topics and to broader audiences. So they start building new content to integrate with the talent strategy and across talent touchpoints. They also start buying new content so that everybody in the organization has access to the learning they need. So they start investing in vendor libraries. They start investing in LXPs. The onus of learning is on employees. We call this level self-directed learning. So if you look at the percentage of organizations at these 2 levels, that adds up to about 75%. So that is where most organizations are at right now. And the shift to level 3 is the hardest for any organization. At level 3, organizations take the self-directed infrastructure and they go deeper. They integrate the wide range of self-development assets into journeys, career paths, specific skill development solutions. They set up functional capability academies to help organizations build capabilities which are critical for them to advance in their careers and critical for business success. CEMEX, for example, has a health and safety academy. Capital One has a cloud engineering academy. Intel is setting up its AI academy. Level 3 is a fantastic level to be at because at this level, organizations truly support learning. They build leaders at every level. They tailor development for each individual. What is missing at this level is that the connection between learning and growth is still not fully crystallized. Now, level 4 is the North Star where learning translates into career growth. At this level, organizations don't just leave it at you own your career. They facilitate career growth. So they create formalized pathways for individuals to move from low-value, low-demand careers to high-value, high-demand careers. And they have specific steps in these pathways for how people can get there, including education, certification, training. Walmart, for example, has built pathways for frontline store associates to move into cybersecurity roles. Now, to identify what are those roles which will be high value, high demand in the future, what will those skills be? These organizations leverage systems of talent intelligence and help individuals build those skills while building critical talent for their future needs. In addition to creating extensive career growth opportunities, these organizations also democratize access to these opportunities. So they set up talent marketplaces so that individuals don't just consume learning content, they can experience new domains freely, quickly, through gigs, through learning opportunities, through projects, through coaching, through mentoring, and through internal mobility. At this level, employees still own their career, but the organization operationalizes how you can get there. Level 4 organizations are organizations that leverage the power of learning to facilitate growth in the flow of work. Now, you can tell from my screen there are only about 11% of organizations that are at this level. But these organizations have significantly superior talent, business, and innovation outcomes to an extent that these organizations are almost 30 times more likely to be great places to work. So with that, let me bring it home. Yes, Growth is what matters the most, and I'm going to say that many times today, many more times today if I haven't said that already. Growth today is not just a good to do. It is a business imperative. 4 million people are leaving their jobs every year. We currently have 10 million jobs open. 11 million new jobs are likely to be created in the near future. The talent that organizations need to survive in the future does not exist. You need to build that talent, and learning is the linchpin. It is the most critical piece for building skills and enabling growth. Learning functions today need to focus on relevance over quantity, timeliness over in-depth instruction. You need to focus on skills that are not just important today, but will be very important in the future. You need to give people long-term careers, not just jobs. And you need to empower every individual with not just learning, but growth in the flow of work. I'm going to take a pause here, not because I'm done. I have one more slide before I let you go to lunch. But I'm going to take a pause here because typically when I present to a room full of L&D professionals, this is the point where I start sensing some discomfort. You know, I'll get some deep breaths, and I've seen people shrug their shoulders and say, you know, we get it, but we're L&D, we do learning, we don't do growth like managers do growth. You're probably right, but one, L&D, yes, cannot do this alone. Also, L&D does not have to do this alone. Take a closer look at my screen. The mighty tall trees that you see in the backdrop are coastal redwood trees. They are the strongest form of life on Earth, and I'll tell you why they're so strong. These trees have roots that spread hundreds of feet outwards to join forces with other trees. It's their interconnectedness with other trees that gives them the strength to grow to such great heights. That's exactly what L&D needs to do. L&D needs to step out of its domain, forge deeper connections with business, with IT, with other parts of HR, with talent acquisition, with skills and data architecture teams. You need to synchronize priorities with workforce management teams. L&D today does not need a seat at the table. L&D needs a seat at every table. You need to be the stewards of growth for the entire organization. So it is a very exciting time for L&D professionals. It is daunting, it's overwhelming, it's a very significant shift, but it is actually very exciting. And as you get started on this journey or the big shift, I would love to leave you with some key calls to action. Number one, you need to build critical capabilities across the organization. Everything that you deliver in terms of training, content, resources, programs has to fit into a bigger capability model. And this capability model has to be designed by the organization, not by L&D. Now, you need to focus on capabilities that are critical today and are important for your business to thrive in the future. And you need to set up capability academies which are sponsored and led by the business. When we talk about capabilities, essentially what we're doing is we're holding L&D accountable for building capabilities across the organization. If you truly want to do that, we also need to invest in building capabilities in the L&D function. So what are the capabilities that matter? Learning in the flow is table stakes. You have to do it, and that has to come first because that's how people learn. But you also need to build L&D capabilities in agile and iterative design. You need to hone data and analytics skills. And you really need to make friends with L&D technology. L&D technology is one of the most complex tech stacks in business today, but experimenting and innovating with L&D technologies is the number one most impactful L&D capability based on our research. All right, number two, you need to focus content development on relevance and timeliness. What that means is, again, everything you deliver, training, content, resources, programs, has to fit into employees' career paths. It has to help them grow, and it can do that only if it is available to them in a timely manner. So when they need it, where they need it, how they need it. How do you do that? To do that, you need to focus a lot of work on skills-based taxonomies, micro-learning, short videos, simulations, and case studies, for example. You also need to build leaders at every level. Leadership development is a very critical enabler because when you build leaders at every level, you're giving people an opportunity to grow as leaders. You're also helping them build capabilities using which they can help other people in the organization grow. And finally, and most importantly, you need to illuminate clear pathways for how people can use learning to grow in their careers. Bonsecure's Mercy Health has created pathways for entry-level healthcare associates to move into nursing careers through education. And they use a very interesting deli counter analogy. So when you go to a deli counter, you get your token number, you see the tokens flashing, you know exactly how many people are in front of you in the queue, and you know that when the counter opens up, you will get your turn. That is exactly what they do with pathways. So when an individual is part of a career pathway or goes through a pathway, at the end of it, they automatically get placed into those high-value, high-paying jobs without having to apply for them. That is a world-class example of leveraging learning to facilitate career growth. You have to focus on career growth, because if you don't focus on career growth, everything you do in learning does not really matter, because when people leave your organization, they take their skills with them. Growth is what matters the most for individuals, for businesses, and learning needs to make it happen. Thank you so much for hearing me out. I am done with my spiel on what I wanted to present. We have about 3 more minutes allocated to this session, so I'd love to take a few questions before we wrap. Lots of questions. Anyone? Actually, you raised your hand first. Let's start with you. Do we have a mic?
Hi, Nehal. Thank you so much. I'm just curious about the academies bit. Academies have been around for quite some time, right? But I see in the last 1.5, 2 years, there's been a narrative around, again, they are in focus again. How do you think those are being different? Or what do you think is going to be differentiated this time around in terms of academies? Why are they back, basically?
I love that you asked that question, because the definition of academies has really changed. So anyone who has an online network, so organizations will also call a LinkedIn library an academy, right? Because it's a digital space where you have resources to learn. Now, what has really changed is the definition of capability academies. How we define a capability academy is organizing learning not around a lot of content, but also critical capabilities, and cementing those learnings through developmental experiences, through exposure, through interactions, through communities. It is not just content, it is the ability to apply that learning and practice it in the scope of that academy. So typically, the kind of capability academies, how we define them and what we're referring to, will have a program, will have journeys associated, will have mentors and experts who will tell you what to do. They will be managed, there will be managed interactions which are facilitated by L&D, but they're leader-led conversations. And as part of those academies, you will probably have a 3-month real work assignment, or you'll be able to shadow experts. So that is a real academy, like how you would go on a program or an immersive MBA program where you have internships and things like that as part of your curriculum. Those are the academies that we're talking about. So they're back because they have a different meaning, even though these words have been around for a really long time. Does that answer your question? Yeah. So I'll sum it up to say that academies are a way to facilitate career growth, but they're not the channel. Academies are focused on not just consuming learning, but practicing that learning, because in a program where so you're all listening to me today, but if you don't go and apply any of it, you're going to forget it by tomorrow, I can promise you. So a capability academy makes sure that you're able to apply that so that there is retention. I want to take a couple more. So the lady behind you raised your hand first, so I want to make sure you get a chance.
Yeah, hi. I'm Yogini from Xiaomi.
Hi.
I wanted to ask you that we are talking about career growth, but the definition of growth today is changing. And especially in an organization which is quite flat as ours, growth is not necessarily vertical. Sometimes it's cross-functional and horizontal. And in our organization, we encourage people to move cross-functionally every 2 or 3 years so that you become a well-rounded business person. But at the same time, it is a risk for the business to take on people who have absolutely no experience in that function. So how do we redefine growth, and where can L&D come in and support that? Because right now the world is moving away from competencies and going towards more hands-on skills. But like you said, we are far behind and trying to catch up pace, and people are developing faster than we are as a function. So what is the starting point really?
Lots of things, very exciting question. Number one, I loved that you mentioned the point that it's a risk if we bring in people who don't have experience. Bring in people who have a lot of experience, give them heavy pay packages, and they'll leave anyway. That's a bigger risk. Second, you're talking about moving people cross-functionally, and that's assuming that people have those opportunities. But a bigger fact check is, it was, I think last week McKinsey came up with this great attrition report. 65% of people who have left their jobs in the past 2 years have completely left industries. And half of the population that has left jobs have not left for anything else but lack of career growth. So let's admit it, even if we believe we are doing enough, people want more. People will always want more. When you have a Coach handbag, you want a Louis Vuitton handbag after that. So you will always want more. So that is one. Now, people are learning all the time, right? Now, think about it. Even if my organization does not even have a learning function, I will figure it out. I will learn. But it is to a company's advantage if you can tap into that learning to make your future sustainability better. Every industry is converging. So I think you mentioned Xiaomi, right? Telecom industries are basically now becoming media industries. Healthcare companies are becoming data and informatics companies. Retail industries are now e-commerce industries. Every industry is converging. So if you focus on now, you're probably building enough skills. But if you look at 5 years ahead, which is why we're talking about synchronizing priorities with workforce management teams, because we need to look ahead. How is the industry converging? What does talent intelligence data tell you about the future skills that will be important? And those will be skills that you need to focus on. If you don't have any skill gaps right now, that is a fantastic place to be in. But we need to think about what skills will be needed in the future, and we move on to that. So, all right, I'm going to take the absolutely last question because I know you raised your hand thrice, and I will keep it quick. So let's go. What is the motivation for them to learn? Because if I have to do self-learning, I will go and learn a baking course because that will probably give me more happiness than learning something new in an organization which I may or may not be able to apply. So the biggest answer to that is people will take charge of their learning when they see those outcomes connected to that. So that I think is a perfect way to wrap the session, because learning in the flow today is not working because it is not flowing into the right outcomes. People will focus on self-learning when it will lead to growth. If it's not leading to growth, they'll go learn other things, like I might go and take a baking class today. All right, thank you everyone.